Montreal Protocol, pushing the most efficient cooling equipment with the lowest GWP refrigerants. So we have three experts, and we're going to start with Johanna Andersen, Director of Learning and Member Engagement, Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council. Prior to joining the Purchasing Council, Johanna coordinated the state of Minnesota's Sustainable Procurement Program for 10 years, assisting the state with making purchases that demonstrated the highest level of environmental, social, and economic responsibility. We'll follow Johanna with Kristen Taddonio, a colleague of mine at the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development. By the way, I should introduce myself. I'm Durwood Zaelke, the president and founder of the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development, IGSD. We've been deeply interested in and active in supporting the Montreal Protocol for many, many decades. So it's good to be doing this side of it. So in addition to Johanna, we have Kristen Taddonio. Kristen spent the early part of her career at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and then moved to the Department of Energy and has played key roles in the Energy Star program and helping the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development lead this effort on sustainable purchasing. And finally, we have Dr. Stephen O. Andersen, a colleague of mine on and off for the last 40 plus years, who will help answer questions and otherwise keep this a lively discussion today. So I'm going to turn it over now to Johanna.
Great, thank you, Durwood. And hello, everybody. Very good to be with you today. I'd like to just take a few minutes to introduce you to my organization, the SPLC, just so you have some context for why the IGSD and the SPLC partnered to really focus in on the role of procurement in climate-friendly refrigerants. Next slide, please. So the SPLC is a nonprofit organization that was formed in 2013, focused on simply simplifying and standardizing sustainable purchasing by collaborating in a multi-sector manner to develop programs that guide organizations, help measure sustainable purchasing, and recognize those who are leading in this space. Next, please. So we grew from 2015, a group of about 30 organizations, to over 165 member organizations. And these organizations represent all sectors, from small community college to the largest university, from local government all the way through large state governments, and then corporations from a tiny business all the way through globally operating corporations. And we also partner with NGOs such as IGSD that have issues that can really be addressed through procurement. So we work together to support members to lead strategic sustainable purchasing programs that focus on the most impactful opportunities to address the impacts of their procurement. Next, please. And the reason that we focus on procurement is because organizations that have been addressing the sustainability impacts of their operations for well over a decade and have those managed pretty well are starting to realize that a huge portion of the environmental, social, and economic impacts that they care about actually are embedded within their supply chain. So this is anything from the social impacts of human rights abuses, and then of course the environmental impacts like climate change that we're here to talk about today. Next, please. And specifically with respect to the climate-friendly refrigerants project that we partnered with IGSD on, we've recognized that the climate impacts of procurement often dwarf the scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions for many organizations. So in this particular slide, we worked with the West Coast Climate Forum to look at the scope 1, 2, and 3 greenhouse gas emissions of public agencies, higher ed institutions, and utilities in the US. And what we saw is that the scope 3 supply chain emissions are significantly larger than the operational greenhouse gas emissions for these organizations. So at the SPLC, we like to create guidance that assists our purchasing members in buying goods and services that are less carbon intensive. We recognize this is a significant opportunity to support action on climate. And we had the really wonderful coincidence of meeting Stephen at an event a year ago where we realized that this was a space, climate-friendly refrigerants was a space that purchasers desperately needed guidance to support their purchasing of more climate-friendly products. So we formed an action team. Kristen's going to tell you all about the great guidance that we developed. And then I'm happy to answer any questions about how we work with our members on taking climate action at the end of the session. So thanks for having me today.
All right, thank you very much, Stephanie. And now we'll turn it over to Kristen.
Thank you very much. And thank you everybody who is on the call for spending some of your time with us today. I'm going to be speaking about how to stay cool without warming the planet by procuring energy efficient products that use the lowest possible global warming potential refrigerants or climate friendly refrigerants. Next slide, please. So this new procurement guidance that has been developed out of a cooperation between the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council and the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development is first of its kind procurement guidance that targets global purchasers, but with a particular focus on the North American market, because that is where many of our members are located and also where a lot of the guidance is most needed. The framework can easily be adapted, though, for worldwide application, and we welcome partners and opportunities to translate this guidance for other markets. So as you're watching along today, if you see something that you think would be fantastic if it was more locally available for you, please do reach out and let us know so that hopefully we can adjust and expand this guidance to be more inclusive. Government and NGO partners are welcome. And we also encourage people to consider how proactive procurement can be complemented by government efforts to stop environmental dumping. That could be the import of low efficiency products and leak prevention campaigns, trying to reduce emissions that occur during servicing and end of life. Equipment suppliers are welcome to pay attention as well. We would love to feature some of your best possible equipment. And finance institutions can trust that when this guidance is followed, institutions are doing their best to make sure that procurement is as sustainable as it can possibly be. Next slide, please. Today, I'm going to cover 4 topics. First, why should you demand high efficiency and climate-friendly refrigerants? Secondly, how can procurement help protect the climate? Third, where to find the procurement guidance and product lists that are energy efficient and use climate-friendly refrigerants. And then finally, recognition opportunities for organizations and institutions that take action. Next slide, please. First, why demand high efficiency and climate-friendly refrigerants? Well, we know from a lot of the excellent science that has been done here under the Montreal Protocol that moving to climate-friendly refrigerants and alternatives to high global warming potential HFCs can avoid up to half a degree of warming this century, when half a degree of warming avoided is needed most. and that combining energy efficiency with the HFC phase down can potentially save up to another half a degree of warming. These are incredible contributions, and they're contributions that really are dependent on the actions that those of you on the call take. State and national laws and regulations, fortunately, are increasingly mandating that organizations switch to climate-friendly refrigerants. And the good news is that upon an extensive review, we have found that there are many energy-efficient, affordable options that are available now in a variety of applications. Next slide, please. So by combining high efficiency and climate-friendly refrigerants, you can achieve the best possible outcome. There has been a lot of procurement guidance that looks only at energy efficiency, ignoring the climate impacts of refrigerants or foams. And there are other pieces of guidance that may look only at the global warming potential of a piece of equipment while ignoring its energy efficiency. So by procurement guidance and by asking for products that combine both high efficiency and climate-friendly refrigerants, you achieve the best of both worlds. You get superior life cycle climate performance by minimizing both the direct, that's the refrigerant emissions, and the indirect emissions, those related to electricity consumption or energy consumption. And then, of course, the superior life cycle product savings not only look at the first cost of equipment, but at the life cycle cost. For many pieces of equipment, the energy used to operate that equipment cost more than the actual equipment in the first place. So it's important to consider both that first cost and the ongoing cost. Next slide, please. So at this point, you are all familiar, I hope, with the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. Next slide, please. But if you are not, the Kigali Amendment, we are very pleased to be celebrating nearly 4 years now since the Kigali Amendment was signed, a global agreement phasing down the production and consumption of high global warming potential hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs. The phase down schedule here indicates that this transition is already underway, and it's so pleasing to know that as of now, over 100 countries have already signed or ratified the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, with many more, hopefully including the United States, on the way. Next slide, please. In the United States, there's been very strong US industry support of the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. Those of you that may have had the pleasure of attending some of yesterday's side events likely heard of legislation in the United States, the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act, or the AIM Act, which has already passed portions of the United States Congress and hopefully may be implemented in short order, that essentially meets the same intention of the Kigali Amendment, and we hope that ratification happens soon after that. Next slide, please. In the meantime, over the last 4 years, there's been a lot of action on the part of US states that are banning and restricting high global warming potential HFCs as well. IGSD created a website, hfcbans.com, that keeps track of these state bans for procurement officials to refer to, because we never want a procurement official to be in the position of ordering a product that it turns out is not legal in the state in which they operate. And others may also be interested in seeing what is going on at the state level. You can find that at hfcbans.com. Next slide, please. So how can purchasers help? Well, the very simple answer is Purchasers can use the guidance that was developed by SPLC and IGSD, and you can find that at climatefriendlycooling.com/procurement guidance. And here's what that guidance helps you do. It helps you commit to purchasing low global warming potential, energy efficient products. And when calculating the cost of the company of new purchases, it helps you look at both the lifetime considerations in addition to that initial purchase. So that includes things like disposal and servicing. It can help you reduce refrigerant leakage by monitoring system changes, and procurement officials can also help the climate and help their company's bottom lines by ensuring that there's proper disposal for all products that contain high global warming potential refrigerants. Next slide, please. So the procurement recommendations for climate-friendly refrigerants, again, are available now. Please check them out at climatefriendlycooling.com/procurement guidance and ask how you can support our launch. Next slide. So now I'm going to go through a few examples of what you'll find in this procurement guidance. Some of the quick wins, energy efficient products that are available with climate-friendly refrigerants now. Please, next slide. So currently, the climatefriendlycooling.com site covers a variety of product categories, including refrigerators, freezers, vending machines, heat pump water heaters, commercial refrigerators and ice makers, laboratory grade refrigerators and freezers, particularly important as vaccine distribution ramps up, hopefully delivering us from COVID-19, air conditioners, and vehicle air conditioners. Next slide, please. So it's important to note that to develop these product lists for the North American market, we start with certification programs that identify and independently verify the energy efficiency of these products. So we begin with the Energy Star lists, and then we screen for products that contain low global warming potential refrigerants. For those of you unfamiliar with Energy Star, it is a global program that labels energy efficient products and equipment. It is one of the most, if not the most, widely recognized environmental label in North America. So for commercial refrigerators, not only are these refrigerators and freezers more energy efficient than ever, they save a lot of money. And as of 2020, there's over 1,000 low GWP, low global warming potential models that are available for purchase. And you can find an updated spreadsheet of these products on our website. Next, please. The same is true with commercial ice makers. There are dozens of models that we have found that are available on the US market that are both energy efficient and affordable. Next slide, please. For lab grade refrigerators and freezers, the great news is that there's over 600 Energy Star qualified refrigerators and freezers that use climate friendly refrigerants like R600A, R290, and R744. So you don't have to choose between a product that performs well and a product that is climate friendly. You can have the best of both worlds. Next slide, please. You'll find many more product types that are available on this website as well. Everything from room air conditioners to residential refrigerators and freezers, vending machines, to even a list of how to identify and make sure that the vehicle you purchase, if in North America, is certain to use a low global warming potential refrigerant. It is important to note that Energy Star does not yet certify vehicles. Next slide, please. All right, so at this point, I would like to invite everybody who's in attendance, if you've not already clicked on that website, to please check it out, climatefriendlycooling.com, and to consider joining other climate leaders and taking the pledge. In addition to the product list and procurement guidance that's available on this website, you'll also find the opportunity to take a pledge to buy low global warming potential energy efficient products, and to promote these practices within your organization and share that guidance within your networks. It's very simple. There's no cost to participate. And in doing so, you can get some recognition for your leadership. Next slide, please. So there's big rewards for participants for those who sign up through the website. We'll be providing you with advanced copies of updated guidance. It is important to note that this guidance is a version 1.0. We do anticipate updating this on a regular basis as more product categories and pieces of equipment become available in a wider market with low global warming potential refrigerants. You'll also get notification of updated product lists from climatefriendlycooling.com, technical support from experts to help you transition. And of course, we'd be happy to feature you in our materials. And if you have any success stories that you would like to share, we would love to share those with others as well. Next slide, please. All right. Next slide, please. So to recap, one of the reasons that this topic is so incredibly important is because fast action can help avoid up to 0.5 degrees Celsius of warming by switching to low global warming potential refrigerants. And procurement can also help to avoid another 0.5 degree by focusing on energy efficiency. There is excellent guidance that is now available and a toolkit and resources to help you make smarter purchasing decisions. And we would love to have you participate. So thank you for your time and attention. Thank you for your commitment to helping the planet and help avoid unnecessary global warming. Back to you, team.
Thank you, Kristen. That was a terrific presentation. And I'm glad you ended with the recap to remind us how big the contribution is that this strategy can make for climate protection. So we are in a very dangerous moment with climate change, where the self-reinforcing feedbacks are about to take over, where the Earth will warm itself beyond what humans have already done. And when that is unleashed, that will lead to irreversible and potentially catastrophic tipping points. The best scientists, including the IPCC in its special report on 1.5 degrees, what we have to do to stay below that critical threshold, have told us that we have perhaps 10 years until we lose control. So the need for speed becomes paramount. The 10-year sprint on the way to 2050 net zero is a race we have to win. And the Montreal Protocol has a unique role to play. As you said, avoiding up to 0.5 degree Celsius of warming, very, very big piece when you look at where we are, 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial times, but heading in 10 years to 1.5. So if we take that 0.5 out, we give the world more time to do the decarbonization that we need at 2050. Very, very important. And then the energy efficiency, again, can double the potential climate benefits. So I'd like now to start with a couple questions for Steve. Steve, the Montreal Protocol is renowned for solving the first great threat to the global atmosphere by putting the stratospheric ozone layer on the path to recovery by maybe 2065. Fantastic job. But it's also done more than any other treaty for climate protection. And you, along with the Velders team, which you're a part of, have calculated the climate benefits. So I wonder if you could start your Q&A discussion with a brief history of that, and then a couple of other questions for you. The great effort that you did with EESL in India to help them with their first procurement of super efficient air conditioning, which, as I recall, brought down the price by about 30% and increased the efficiency by perhaps 40%. So a double win with that procurement. And then your work in Morocco as well. So over to you, Steve, with those initial prompts.
Thank you. Thank you for those great questions, Durwood. The Montreal Protocol, of course, originally addressed ozone-depleting substances like CFCs and HFCs and many other chemicals. And it was very successful at protecting the ozone layer. It got off to a fast start with some simple control measures, and then it was strengthened over and over again with amendments and adjustments. And as that process went underway, the Technology and Economic Assessment Panel was very influential in pointing out the other criteria that should be used. So it was always the case that the Montreal Protocol was alert to the questions of safety and toxicity, atmospheric byproducts, and energy efficiency, especially. And so what we found was that the alternatives that replaced the ozone-depleting substances were mostly not in kind. About 85% of the replacement was non-fluorocarbon products that, of course, have very low carbon footprint. And then 15% of that, of course, went through a transition, first using HCFCs and now HFCs, and with HFCs being phased down. So this was a very intelligent and practical process where you did what you can, when you can, and you kept welcoming better and better technology. So the calculation that was made by the Wilders team found that the Montreal Protocol had done more to protect climate than all other efforts directed solely at climate, including the Kyoto Protocol. And in fact, if Mario Molina and Sherry Rowland had not discovered ozone depletion, and if other scientists were slow in coming to that same conclusion, and there were no Montreal Protocol, then today, the greenhouse gas effect of the ozone-depleting substances would be approaching the levels of carbon dioxide, and we would have already passed all of the tipping points of those self-reinforcing feedbacks you talked about, and the world would be lost. So already the Montreal Protocol saved the Earth from certain death. It's even more important now to realize that the remaining gases, the HCFCs and the HFCs, could be phased out quickly and phased down. And that could take a big bite out of the carbon equivalent results. And we need that a lot because of cases like the Antarctic that are very fragile. And so this is a powerful tool. And my congratulations to the Montreal Protocol. It's been a tremendous success. The EESL innovation from India is also quite remarkable. And this was done in a prelude to the Kigali Amendment, that India was already deciding how could they be a climate leader. And they had demonstrated with Energy Efficiency Services Limited, which is a government organization, that they could leapfrog across compact fluorescent bulbs and choose LED bulbs. So they go directly from incandescent to LED without wasting their time on the obsolete CFLs. And they had done that with millions of dollars of savings for the Indian citizens and with a big reduction in air pollution and climate forcing. So a number of organizations, including IGSD and TERI and NRDC, worked with EESL on getting them to ask for a big purchase, a bulk procurement of superior air conditioners at a lower price. And they were immediately successful in their first procurement, although some of those air conditioners were supplied by companies who bid low with HFC 410A. Subsequently to that, they've been able to get the lower GWP products. That work in India inspired Morocco to take on the question of how they could have a buyer's club that would offer them higher efficiency at lower price. And the current status of that is we have inventoried the existing air conditions and come to the realization that most refrigeration and air conditioning equipment everywhere in the world is so old that it was inefficient when purchased, it was often badly installed, and it has not been maintained. So it's drastically cost effective to abandon the obsolete equipment, ramp up the factories to produce the new equipment with many new jobs and profits, and replace all that old equipment at the same time pulling out that bank of CFCs and HCFCs and HFCs and destroying that locally in cement kilns for another big bite out of carbon and avoiding these future emissions that would come from the equipment. So that when you couple all that with what's been done by the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council and the IGSD that now tells you exactly what products can be purchased in these many categories that satisfy both the criteria of energy efficiency and low GWP, it's a win-win event for all. And we're very proud to have done this and welcoming new partners.
Steve, thank you. That's great. We have a couple of questions that have come in. And the first one for Kristen and Stephanie is, are the products just U.S. market or also useful for other countries in other regions?
So many of the products that you will find listed at climatefriendlycooling.com are globally marketed. So the good news is that these lists are still relevant, even if you happen to be living outside of the US. And for particular categories, we also refer to links where certain products are country specific, where you can find highly efficient products. So for example, we do refer people to the top 10 EU lists, which actually, interestingly enough, are not only the most energy efficient products there, but all use lower global warming potential refrigerants, in that case R32. So we also invite people, if you see that there are products not covered in your market, but you know of products that are available in your market that are not listed here, please do let us know. We would love to include those.
Stephanie, do you want to add anything to that?
Or Johanna?
Or Johanna, if she's there.
Yes. No, I mean, Kristen is definitely our expert in the actual refrigerants, but I definitely encourage everyone on this call to help us broaden the guidance into the international markets if you have products to share with us. Thanks.
Okay, great. And then we have a question from Finn Waverly. So happy birthday, Finn. Good to see you on this event. And her question is a great question that starts with what are the cutoffs for the climate friendly? I'm trying to find the rest of the question here. Okay, so what refrigerants do you put in the climate friendly category? You know, are the HFC HFO blends compatible with a 1.5 trajectory? So on the one hand, we need the fastest speed we can, and that means low GWP refrigerants and the greatest energy efficiency. So Steve, I know you've been a pioneer on life cycle climate performance, so I'll give you that question to answer.
Thank you, Durwood. Let me just give a couple of examples of that. One of the cases that's a large success is people will remember that auto air conditioning used CFC 12 that had a global warming potential of 10,200. And then that was replaced by global consensus with an HFO 1234YF that has a global warming potential of less than 1. So a drastic reduction over 134A, which was 1,200. And then now there's a choice approved by the Society of Automotive Engineers, which is HFC 152A with a slightly higher GWP 138, but it actually has a lower carbon footprint because the energy savings of the secondary loop overcome the problem of the refrigerant. So the example I'm giving is that you can't count on looking at the refrigerant alone to know if it's friendly to the climate. You absolutely have to look at the carbon footprint, which is the LCCP, and it absolutely has to be calculated under real world circumstances. A similar case is underway where most manufacturers have chosen R32, which is a 2/3 reduction in the GWP emissions and an increase in energy efficiency. And then there are other manufacturers that are bringing on board the R290, which is less than 1, so it's a superior refrigerant in GWP. And in some circumstances, it also achieves the highest possible energy efficiency. So as Kristen was saying, it's often the case there's no conflict at all in choosing a product that satisfies both criteria, but you have to be careful that you don't ignore energy efficiency and only concentrate on the refrigerant. So it's a win-win situation. It's slightly complicated. One of the advantages of the procurement document is it goes through and explains those details of the criteria that are used, and then it comes up with the actual products that you need to buy. So a procurement officer can become confident in the process and choose from the list of products that pass both screens with confidence and direct these billions of dollars of purchasing from the members of SPLC to the right products.
Thank you, Steve. Let me ask a follow-up to Kristen. Kristen, the relative percentage of the climate benefit from the refrigerant versus the lifetime energy efficiency, assuming it's still fossil fuel energy. Now, when we decarbonize completely, and we're in the wonderful future we need to be in, and have complete clean energy, this will be different. But it's going to be several decades, we hope, before 2050, but that's the current goal. So how much do we get from the energy efficiency and how much from the refrigerant?
Certainly. Well, it partially depends on whether you're looking at 20-year or 100-year global warming potentials, as our commenter observed. But even if you're using the 20-year global warming potentials and you have a relatively high GWP refrigerant, you're still looking at oftentimes upwards of 70% of the total greenhouse gas emissions attributable to energy consumption. Now, this, of course, will highly depend on your climate. If you're in an area where you're using significantly more energy for cooling, running your AC more, obviously those indirect emissions are going to be higher than if you're in an area that's cooler and you're perhaps using a little bit less electricity, or in the case of a vehicle, petrol to operate that equipment. Now, as a utility director myself, I am very optimistic that we will see a speedy transition globally to more renewable energy now that renewable energy prices have dropped below that of fossil fuels for electricity generation. But as Durwood noted, that transition will not happen overnight. In the utility world, even a transition over 10 years is considered very fast. So over the life cycle of products that are being purchased now, it is incredibly important to focus both on energy efficiency and refrigerant GWP. And I should note, from a practical standpoint, if I or you or a procurement officer is asking, what do I buy now? They may not have the luxury of waiting, 3-4 years for the next generation lower GWP refrigerant to be made available in their market. So what we're trying to do with these product lists are direct procurement officials to what's the best that you can buy now. And we will be updating those as more products and more refrigerants in more markets become available.
Great. Thank you. Now we have a question from Zaelke for Johanna. Could you please share the barriers you encounter at the beginning? In Brazil, we're having difficulties with the lack of products with lower GWP and American products available in the US with lower GWP not being available in Brazil. So, Johanna.
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly common across many product categories, depending on where we are in the marketplace change and transition. I'll speak to it at a more general level, and then I'd like to also allow Kristen an opportunity to share specifically with respect to equipment containing refrigerants. At the more general level, this is why the SPLC was founded in the first place. We recognize that individual buying institutions don't have the power to drive the transition to sustainable products. So we formed an organization that could send a clear market signal to suppliers and allow them to offer products that are more sustainable. So what I'd recommend to Zaelke is can collaborate with other organizations and do a shared buy for equipment containing climate-friendly refrigerants. That might encourage the supplier to actually be able to offer those products in Brazil. I'm sure it's not as simple as I just explained, but accessing shared contracts or collaborating with other larger institutions to demand those products will require the suppliers to respond. It just might take some discussions with the suppliers and collaboration with other local organizations. But I'd like to also let Kristen respond with respect to the specific equipment containing refrigerants.
Certainly. From my perspective, one of the biggest challenges and one of the most exciting developments is the work that's been going on in international standard setting bodies. So from organizations like Underwriters Lab, UL, ASHRAE, which used to stand for the American Society of Heating and Refrigeration Engineers, and SAE, formerly Society of Automotive Engineers, we have seen an incredible and prolific amount of work over the last 5 years to update standards to allow for the introduction of new refrigerants that are lower global warming potential, but that sometimes may have additional flammability that needs to be mitigated, or high pressure issues in the case of, a refrigerant like R744. So as a result of these standards that have been updated, some within just the last 6 months, what that enables governments to do is to refer to and incorporate those safety standards and industry standards to make industry more comfortable introducing lower global warming potential refrigerants. So I think over the course of the next several years, we're likely to see more companies introducing more products, more safety standards being developed that allow the installation base to be more comfortable installing some of those products and equipment. So I think it's some of the issues like that that have historically been barriers, but that thankfully are now increasingly being resolved.
Thank you. So we have a comment from Tapio from the Nordic Ozone Group, and he notes that they've done similar work, and there's a website mentioned as well that he's referring everyone to. So Trina, if you can make that available to everyone, and their green public procurement work, I'm sure you've seen, Kristen and Johanna, and if you haven't, check it out. Okay, that sounds very useful. Then there's another question. This is from Hallback. Aren't there other criteria that should be considered when you're doing procurement? For example, there's a recent study by Oko Recherche that concluded that HFOs should not be considered as a long-term alternative, as when they break down, there's some TCA which accumulates and could present other environmental problems. So again, this is bringing us back to the the question of start and strengthen, the question of chemicals that are replacements versus the so-called natural refrigerants. And as you're looking at this, you might also address the flammability questions of the R290, for example. And Kristen, maybe I'll start with you.
Absolutely. So you are completely right. Nobody should just look at one attribute when selecting any refrigerant or piece of equipment, right? I believe you're talking about TFA, which is trifluoroacetic acid, which is a degradation product. It's an atmospheric breakdown product of certain refrigerants, not just HFOs. It's important to note there are many HFCs that do also degrade to TFA. The science on that has been developing, and it's something that certain safety authorities certainly are paying attention to. It's also worth noting that there are some HFCs and other types of refrigerants that don't produce TFA at all as a breakdown product. So one of the refrigerants that Stephen just mentioned, HFC 152A, while it has a slightly higher global warming potential, it's still below 150 on a 100-year basis. It does not actually produce TFA as an atmospheric breakdown product. In addition to TFA, one thing that safety authorities often look to when assessing refrigerant risk profiles is not just flammability, but also those atmospheric degradation products. So if you're in a fire or if you're exposed to a large concentration, does it break down? Does it form HF, hydrofluoric acid? So these are all things that safety authorities and environmental authorities typically do review before deciding what refrigerants to use in their products or to allow in their markets. And this guidance does not recommend any refrigerants that have not been reviewed and listed as acceptable alternatives by the US EPA's significant new alternatives policy program, which also reviews for things like environment, human health, and other risks. Stephen or Johanna, would you like to add anything to that?
Let me just add that there's only one HFO, HFO 1234YF, that has a TFA as an atmospheric byproduct in its degradation. All the other HFOs that are commercialized do not have TFA degradation products. And as Kristen mentioned, HFC 152A and also HFC 32 do not have TFA or other identified disadvantages. So I agree completely with Kristen that you need to keep your eyes open. There should always be vigilance, but that many of these alternatives are superior in every aspect to the chemicals that are replaced.
Okay, thank you. And Johanna, anything to add on that?
No, they're the experts. Thank you.
Right. Great. So we have a follow-up from Zaelke, and let me see if I can tee this up here. Now, this is for Kristen. Pressure from the chemical industry makes high GWP fluids such as R410A very cheap compared to lower GWP alternatives. What makes it difficult to convince manufacturers to produce new R290 or R32 air conditioners? How can we alert the global community? So these are commercial pressures in a competitive market. And Kristen, perhaps you can comment on that.
And I welcome the insights and expertise of others on the panel and perhaps in the audience as well. Here's my personal view on this. I think manufacturers want to be assured that when they choose a new refrigerant, they're going to be able to sell it and have a market for it in as many places as possible. And still to date, some authorities worldwide have lagged behind in adopting the latest and greatest safety standards that may allow for refrigerants like R32 or 290. to be used. And that creates incredible pressure on a manufacturer if they know that they may not be able to sell their market as widely as they had hoped. So in part, it's that demand that Johanna referenced, having large purchasers, aggregating that buying power, showing that there is this interest and demand for it. And that combined with talking to regulators and safety authorities and making sure that they aren't, inadvertently banning a product that may actually be environmentally superior. A little anecdote from my personal history. I got started in this industry actually working with the global automotive sector and trying to remove barriers to the utilization of climate-friendly refrigerants, both R744 and at the time 152A. This was before 1234YF was even introduced. And we had found that globally, there were dozens of states and countries that uniformly banned refrigerants that were high pressure or flammable to any degree. So that would have precluded the use of all of the alternatives within the automotive sector, R744, 152A, and 1234YF, the HFO. And it was through a concerted effort of environmental organizations, industry demand, procurement, and in government that we were able to remove those barriers. And I feel like although it's about 10 years behind, we're starting to see that transition happen within the stationary sector too, and it couldn't be more timely for the health of the planet.
Okay, good, thank you. I'm going to throw out one more question here for the team. Someone, I think it was Kristen, mentioned the dumping problem. So we still see products that are banned or restricted in one market like Europe or the US, and then they're exported to unsuspecting, sometimes poor developing countries. And these pieces of equipment that are inefficient, for example, an AC unit that's inefficient, is basically an energy vampire that sucks up way too much energy from the developing country, energy that's needed for broader access, energy that's needed for development. So could you comment on the dumping problem as well?
If I could take that, I would urge all the participants to go to the Ozone Secretariat website for the other side events. And Monday, there was a side event that featured the latest update on the anti-dumping campaign. But essentially, you're right, Durwood, that the regrettable situation is that manufacturers produce products that would not be legal to sell in the country of manufacture because they have unacceptable refrigerants and high energy use, and they dump those products on these unsuspecting buyers or buyers without market clout or financial clout, and then they get stuck with products that cost them more to own because of the high energy use, and then they later get stuck because as the phase down and the phase out continues, the replacement refrigerants become unavailable or expensive, and then the governments are stuck because they can't meet their obligations to the Montreal Protocol without the import of these products. And of course, we also know that it creates tremendous illegal trade because of the pressure to maintain this old equipment that never should have been sold. So IGSD, working with Ghana and others, have a legal toolkit that can be applied. And of course, the Montreal Protocol itself can be very influential in stopping this kind of terrible behavior, which is in no one's interest except the short-term profits for these irresponsible manufacturers.
Thank you. I know we're coming to the end here. I believe it's an hour program. Katrina, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the end point. And I want to mention that this has been recorded. The PowerPoints will be available. The recording will be available to all participants. And I just want to congratulate the Montreal Protocol again, all the panelists here for sharing their expertise on this critical topic. And it's part of how the Montreal Protocol has evolved as a start and strengthen treaty. So we know that through these kinds of strategies, we can do better and better and better. And ultimately, we'll get to the point where we have super efficient air conditioning for everyone who needs it, with the lowest GWP refrigerant. And but none of it's going to make any difference if we don't also slow climate change in the next 10 years. So that's my advice. Now take the pledge on sustainable purchasing, and everybody have a great day here. So thank you all for participating.
Thank you.